Every deadly sin explained clearly. Pride. Pride is considered the first and most dangerous deadly sin because it places the self above everything else. At its core, pride means believing you are more important, more capable, or more deserving than others. It is not confidence. Confidence is knowing your abilities. Pride is believing your value makes you superior. When pride takes over, a person stops listening, stops learning, and stops admitting mistakes. Pride works by distorting self-perception. Instead of seeing strengths and weaknesses clearly, pride magnifies strengths and ignores flaws. This makes improvement nearly impossible because improvement requires recognizing limits. A proud person often believes rules, advice, and consequences apply to everyone else but not to them. This is why pride is described as deadly. It blocks correction before damage can be prevented. In everyday life, pride shows up as constant self-promotion, refusal to apologize, and treating relationships like competitions. Conversations become performances instead of exchanges. Other people stop being equals and turn into background characters. Over time, pride isolates the person who has it because cooperation depends on humility, and humility cannot exist where pride dominates. Pride also feeds other sins. When someone believes they are above others, it becomes easier to justify greed, cruelty, dishonesty, or exploitation. If you think you are special, you can always invent a reason why normal moral limits should not apply to you. This is why pride is often described as the root sin. Once it takes hold, other sins follow naturally. Pride turns a human into a walking trophy cabinet that expects applause for simply entering the room. But behind the jokes, the real danger is serious. Pride cuts people off from growth, relationships, and reality itself, making eventual failure far more painful when it arrives. Envy. Envy is the deadly sin that focuses entirely on what someone else has. It is not just wanting something nice for yourself. Envy is feeling discomfort, anger, or bitterness because another person has success, attention, possessions, or happiness that you do not. Instead of motivating improvement, envy poisons satisfaction and turns comparison into obsession. Envy works by shifting attention away from your own life and locking it onto someone else's. The mind starts measuring worth based on comparison rather than effort or growth. When this happens, even good things lose their value because they are no longer the best. Someone else's win automatically feels like your loss, even when nothing was taken from you. This sin damages thinking by creating false narratives. Envy convinces people that others are lucky, favored, or undeserving, while their own struggles feel uniquely unfair. Over time, this creates resentment and frustration because the focus stays on outcomes instead of actions. Energy that could improve one's life gets wasted wishing for someone else's. In everyday behavior, envy appears as passive-aggressive comments, constant comparison on social media, and secret enjoyment when others fail. It can also push people toward dishonest shortcuts because earning success feels slower than taking it. When envy goes unchecked, it slowly replaces gratitude with bitterness. Envy is like a brain running a nonstop commercial saying what they have is better than what you have, even when it clearly isn't. But the real danger is that envy steals peace. It makes people blind to their own progress and traps them in endless dissatisfaction. Wrath. Wrath is uncontrolled anger that overwhelms reason. It is not the same as feeling upset or frustrated. Wrath is anger that demands release, often through shouting, aggression, or revenge. Instead of solving problems, wrath escalates them by replacing thinking with reaction. Wrath works by shutting down rational thought. When anger spikes, the brain prioritizes immediate emotional release over long-term consequences. This is why people say things they regret, break things they need, and damage relationships they care about. In the moment, wrath feels powerful, but it actually removes control. This sin becomes dangerous because it justifies harm. Wrath convinces people that their anger is righteous, that they are right to explode. Once this belief takes hold, almost any behavior can be excused. Wrath turns small problems into disasters by magnifying them through emotion. In daily life, wrath shows up as road rage, screaming arguments, online insults, and physical aggression. Even when no one gets hurt physically, words spoken in wrath leave lasting damage. Trust erodes quickly when people feel unsafe around someone's temper. Wrath is the inner voice that treats minor inconveniences like personal attacks. But beneath the jokes, wrath destroys communication. It replaces understanding with intimidation and ensures that problems return again and again because they are never truly resolved. Sloth. Sloth is often misunderstood as simple laziness, but it is much deeper than avoiding effort. Sloth is the refusal to engage with responsibility, growth, or purpose. It is choosing comfort over contribution and delay over action, even when inaction causes harm. Sloth works quietly. Unlike anger or pride, it does not announce itself. It whispers excuses like later, tomorrow, or it doesn't really matter. Over time, these delays pile up until opportunities disappear. Sloth is dangerous because it feels harmless while slowly draining momentum. This sin affects both action and mindset. Physically, it shows up as procrastination and avoidance. Mentally, it appears as indifference toward improvement or meaning. A slothful person may not be unhappy, but they are stagnant, and stagnation eventually leads to regret. In everyday life, sloth looks like ignored responsibilities, unfinished goals, and missed chances. Tasks grow heavier the longer they are avoided, making future action even harder. This creates a loop where avoidance feeds more avoidance. Sloth is the voice that convinces you the couch is a life plan, but in reality, sloth steals potential. It turns what could have been into what never happened, making it one of the most quietly destructive, deadly sins. Greed. Greed is the deadly sin of never feeling satisfied. It is the desire to accumulate more than is needed, whether that means money, power, status, or control. Greed is not about survival or comfort. It is about excess. No matter how much is gained, it never feels like enough. Greed works by resetting the finish line. Every time a goal is reached, a new one instantly appears. The mind becomes focused on accumulation instead of enjoyment. This makes contentment impossible because satisfaction requires stopping, and greed refuses to stop. This sin damages judgment by turning people into resources instead of individuals. Relationships become transactional. Kindness becomes strategic. Decisions are made based on profit rather than principle. Over time, greed pushes people to justify exploitation, dishonesty, or neglect as necessary. In daily life, greed shows up as constant comparison of wealth, obsession with upgrades, and fear of losing what one has. It can also appear as hoarding time, attention, or credit, refusing to share success or opportunity. Greed does not only take from others, it drains the person who carries it. Greed is like trying to fill a bucket with no bottom. The harder you pour, the more frustrated you become. But the real danger is that greed replaces joy with anxiety. Even success feels stressful when losing it becomes the greatest fear. Gluttony. Gluttony is excessive consumption beyond need or reason. While often associated with food, gluttony applies to anything consumed without restraint, including entertainment, substances, attention, or pleasure. It is not about enjoyment. It is about lack of control. Gluttony works by confusing desire with need. The body or mind signals more, even when enough has already been had. This breaks the natural stop signals that protect balance and health. Over time, excess becomes normal and moderation feels uncomfortable. This sin causes harm by prioritizing immediate pleasure over long-term well-being. Physical consequences include illness and exhaustion. Mental consequences include addiction and dependency. Gluttony slowly reshapes habits until excess becomes routine and restraint feels impossible. In everyday behavior, gluttony appears as binge eating, endless scrolling, nonstop streaming, or overindulgence in anything that numbs boredom. The issue is not the activity itself, but the inability to stop. Pleasure turns into compulsion. Gluttony is the voice that says, "One more won't hurt," for the 10th time in a row. But beneath the humor, gluttony steals discipline. It replaces choice with impulse and leaves people controlled by cravings instead of intention. Lust. Lust is intense, uncontrolled desire focused on pleasure without regard for consequence. While commonly linked to sexuality, lust applies to any craving that overrides judgment and respect. Lust is not attraction, it is fixation. Lust works by narrowing focus. Everything outside the desired object becomes irrelevant. Values, commitments, and consequences fade into the background. This tunnel vision makes it easier to betray trust, break promises, or use others for gratification. This sin is destructive because it replaces connection with consumption. Other people stop being individuals and become sources of pleasure. This damages relationships by removing empathy and respect, which are necessary for genuine intimacy. In daily life, lust shows up as obsession, impulsive behavior, and risky decisions. It often disguises itself as freedom or passion, but in reality, it limits control. The stronger the desire, the weaker the restraint. Lust is the inner voice with no brakes and no map. But the real danger is serious. Lust creates regret by trading long-term fulfillment for short-term sensation, leaving emotional and relational damage behind. Pride's aftermath. Why the 7 deadly sins matter together. When grouped together, the 7 deadly sins describe patterns of behavior that slowly damage individuals and societies. Each sin weakens self-control in a different way, but they all share one trait. They replace balance with excess. Whether it is too much anger, too much desire, too much comfort, or too much self-importance, the result is the same: loss of judgment. These sins reinforce one another. Pride convinces someone they are above consequences. Envy fuels resentment. Wrath provides explosive release. Sloth avoids responsibility. Greed demands more. Gluttony consumes without restraint. Lust abandons boundaries. When combined, they create a cycle where short-term satisfaction repeatedly undermines long-term stability. At a simple level, the deadly sins act like warning labels for human behavior. They are not about perfection, but about recognizing where impulses overpower reason. When ignored, they quietly reshape habits, relationships, and decisions until damage becomes unavoidable. The 7 deadly sins aren't ancient myths, they're patterns that still show up in everyday life. Understanding them helps you spot problems before they spiral out of control. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe for more clear, no nonsense explanations like this one.